Welcome back to the channel, everyone. We are here today doing a ChaseBays install video. We're going to be installing the BMW E36 S50 S52 Power Steering Kit with a cooler. You will be able to follow along in this video and understand how to install the non-cooler version as well. The only difference there will be the power steering return line. You just won't go to a cooler. It'll go from the rack back up to the reservoir. If you have any questions on how to install the coolerless system, just drop a comment below and I'll be sure to answer that and let you know how to get that taken care of. Just want to let you know, we did film this while trying to build my E36 for Drift Week. We were trying to cram like 200 hours worth of labor into like 3 days. So some of the video, I do look a little bit haggard, so just bear with me. We'll get you the information you need and we'll get you handled and then make sure you understand how to get this installed. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe.
Alright, so for the power steering, we have this configured a little bit different. Normally you would have your rack and pinion and your subframe in the car. In this case we're doing an oil pan and some other items on the car, so it's a little bit clearer, but these are still pretty well accessible even with all of that stuff in the car. For the power steering feed line, you're going to use a 22mm wrench. Just break that guy loose, take that bolt out, and then you're going to undo the hose clamp from the reservoir there. You'll also undo the hose clamp on the reservoir here. That is for the actual return hose. We've cut that hose, but it is a hose that runs all the way over this way and back on the subframe. And then you'll need the 13mm wrench or socket to get these bolts out for the reservoir and take the reservoir out of the vehicle. More than likely you're going to end up doing that from the top of the car. So you do that up there, and then this is the rack side. So like I said, we had the rack out of the car because we pulled the whole subframe here. So you'll need a 22 here for this bolt on the rack and an 18 for this bolt on the rack. Sorry, 19. And then this is your return line that I was talking about. You'll get rid of that. You'll get rid of this hose. This is the one we cut.
First step's going to be installing the reservoir. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the bracket that had the factory reservoir in there, remove the reservoir, mount it on the engine mount bracket, and then we're going to take that circular mount that came with the ChaseBays kit, slide it around the reservoir, and then slide that into the factory mount itself. Once that is in there, you're going to tighten the 10mm bolt on the side of that bracket to tighten the reservoir into place. Next up, we're going to start installing all of the lines. So to get these hoses all installed, I started with the feed hose. You can see I already had that installed. Now I'm installing the return hose that will be coming from the power steering cooler. I like to make sure I get the reservoir hoses done first, so that's what I am doing. The feed hose, you're just going to use that banjo bolt there, tighten that into the pump and tighten the fitting on the reservoir side, and then get that return hose fastened to the reservoir itself. In this next shot, you can see I have the fitting for the high pressure hose in the pump. You're going to tighten those types of fittings with crush washers kind of to a snug point, and then just add enough torque to crush that crush washer a little bit and make sure it seals up. The next fitting I'm installing here is the rack fittings. So those fittings are going to thread into the rack and pinion. There are two different sizes, so just one will only fit in one hole and the other in the other. So same thing with these ones, you're going to hand tighten them and then just apply enough torque to crush the crush washer. It really doesn't have to be super crazy. In this shot, you can see me using kind of a oversized wrench. It was just what I had really fast underneath my hand to grab. It really does not need to have a ton of torque applied to it, just enough to get that crush washer to seal. So just snug it up, add a little bit of torque to it, and it should seal up no problems. If you have any of those that are leaking, just make sure that you go back and try to add a little bit more torque to them, or make sure that the sealing surfaces are nice and clean before you put those fittings in. In this next shot here, where you can see I have the high pressure hose hooked up to the pump there. I do not have it hooked up to the rack, but essentially you'll just hook it up from there, and then it'll go to the top port of the rack and pinion. Here you can see I'm working on the power steering cooler. This is how you will have your brackets laid out. You will want to make sure you put the brackets on the cooler before you bolt it into the car, because you will not be able to get to the backside to install these little Allen head bolts here. Once you have those brackets fastened to the cooler itself, it's time to loosen up the rack and pinion bolts here. So you will loosen the 2 bolts that mount the rack and pinion. You just need to loosen them up enough to be able to slide the mounts into the bolt areas. Now that you have those bolts loose, you can slide the bracket for the power steering cooler into place and then retighten those bolts. There you go. Now you have your power steering cooler installed, and next up we'll be hooking up the hoses to it. Here you can see I'm installing the hoses to the power steering cooler. The long hose that has the 180-degree fitting on it will go to the far side or the passenger side of the cooler, and then the shorter hose coming from the rack will go to the closer side. This hose that I am installing currently, I have installed backwards, so I did end up switching this around. You should have the 45-degree fitting going onto the cooler and the straight fitting going onto the rack and pinion itself. So don't make that mistake that I'm making here right now, that I'm showing you that I made this mistake. Don't do it. Flip that hose around and install it the correct way. Once you have all your hoses installed, make sure you go over the system. All your dash 6 hoses are going to be an 18mm, and then all of the 1-10 hose is going to be a 1-inch fitting. So just make sure you get those all tightened down. Everything's nice and snug. You really don't have to get crazy with these. Just apply a little bit of torque and they will seal up.
Thanks for tuning in and watching this video. If you have any questions at all, just make sure to comment below and I'll make sure to get those questions answered for you.